which one of these areas will cost you the most sonically to get wrong?
There is so much nonsense talked out there because it sounds good and it sells well. Oh, the rest of this video is a waste of time because all you need to do is go away and listen.
Today we're going to be talking about how not to choose a tone arm. There is an insane amount of advice and reviews and recommendations now because the internet now has a point of view and will tell you what the best arm is as well. And that's not just people, that is AI. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about how some of these recommendations aren't what they're cracked up to be. Okay, so we have basically finished our series of Tonearm Deep Dives. We looked at 6 different areas, the arm tube and counterweight, the bearings, the wiring, geometry and inertia, which we've kind of grouped into one thing, even though we did 2 videos on it, and then anti-skate. Now, I think what we're not saying none of them are important. All of them are important. But what we are interested in exploring today, which I don't think people necessarily will tell you, is which one of these areas will cost you the most sonically to get wrong. Is that fair?
Yeah, or which is the most rewarding is the other way of looking at it.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at it anyway.
Yeah.
Which is the most rewarding to concentrate on, and where to invest the most money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I guess maybe just as a kind of fundamentally, why should we look for an arm that maybe answers the most important question?
Okay, well, that's a really good question. And I think nowadays there is a tendency to kind of focus on various features of an arm. And people must say, oh, carbon fiber is 5 times as strong as aluminium, so carbon fiber arm must be right. No, not necessarily. So that's the sort of why I'd like to put in a huge caveat that when it comes to features, we need to be very careful. And it's interesting, we were quizzing AI what the best arms were. And it comes up by, it talks about the various features. So it'll give the stiffest arm, it considers the stiffest arm in the world.
And also further than just the features, it was talking about the measurements that you can get from those kinds of areas, right?
It's kind of trying to prove this is, qualify the best arms by measurements or features. Like this has the strongest arm tube ever devised in the planet,
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other interesting thing about AI, is how consistently it will mention compliance and cartridge compliance, which to some degree we kind of think is a complete nonsense. And a lot of very educated people would agree that it is essentially a nonsense because it's all based on this fundamental problem of warping.
Yeah.
Which, and if you keep deep diving with AI, it will constantly bring up warps. And the only thing is that warps aren't actually really a problem. So there's a lot of stuff where it's, anyway.
AI is simply feeding off what's said on the worldwide internet. And these things have been said for years and years and years. So it's simply picking up on all of them, coming to a consensus and putting that as the answer. But it's not necessarily the answer at all.
Yeah.
And I know that's going to be very controversial, and I certainly don't want to upset our friend the AI because it's a fast learner. And it does a fantastic job in many, many respects.
Skynet is not going to forgive us for this video, not at all. But we have to do it because, I think
we have to mention this because I fall into the trap sometimes of asking what's the best polish, and it doesn't necessarily come up with the right answer at all.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of things in the algorithm it does.
Yeah.
But trying to get back onto the subject. There is the choice nowadays is enormous because there's been a huge proliferation of arms over the last 20 years. Literally hundreds and hundreds of new arms have come onto the market. So it makes choice extremely difficult. And, there's most stuff has a good review now. And after that, you're left with, what's important? Is it everybody claims they've got a rigid arm? Everybody claims there's zero friction on the bearings. Everybody claims
which is impossible. Completely impossible. Anyway.
Yeah, and then you get into the precision. There's absolutely no play in this bearing whatsoever. Which, by the way, I strongly object to, because the fact is that we tried ABEC 9 bearings and they sounded nowhere good as the worst bearing on the planet. Because you do not want a tight bearing. That's one area where rigidity is a nonsense, because you want the lowest possible friction. And when you get to these super rigid bearings, as they're called, they don't actually sound much good at all.
Higher stiction, also less loss,
yeah.
vibrational
I mean,
loss.
nobody believes that because they haven't listened to it. We
Yeah.
have. We've researched bearings to the nth degree, but there is so much nonsense talked out there because it sounds good and it sells well. I mean, this stuff really does sell well, and AI loves it because it's measurable. This is quantifiable, so it must be right. I should just qualify on the worst bearing. What I mean by that is what you call C3 bearings, which have quite a slack fit. And also the other thing we do is we do not tightly press fit them into the housing, because that is a disaster. It's just absolute disaster. People, when we first came out with our silver arm, which back in 2002, when there were very few arms on the market, I mean, basically it was the Lin, Akito and Ecos.
Well, this was like the death of vinyl era, essentially.
The SME5, the Rigas, the Name Arrow, the Roxanne, things like the Well-Tempered Arm, the Brinkman. It was quite a narrow field of the best high-performance arms. And the choice was fairly limited. I mean, we were reviewed in that environment by somebody who had heard, probably the most respected editor of the time, who had heard all of these arms. And he said about our silver arm at the time, back in 2002, this is probably the best arm in the world right now. Could easily charge 5 times the price if they dressed it up in a fancy kit. But that was using these techniques. And everybody was shocked at the time. I mean, we'd been saying for years about all the kind of dogma that goes on in the hi-fi industry. Things like if you had a Riga arm, people would crank up the nut, the bass nut, massively, because they never listened. That was the philosophy. And we said, just undo it, just tighten it to finger tight. It'll sound so much more open. The whole world will open up. People started doing it, found that worked. Tightness, rigidity, it's not the end of the story. It's far more complicated than that. We really need to just talk about some of the caveats beforehand. And so as I was saying earlier, you've got everybody, all the manufacturers claim to have the most rigid, low resonance, well damped, high absorption arm tube that money can buy, sort of thing.
Okay.
And low friction bearings, super cabling, etc., etc. And they all say the same thing. So how can you possibly judge between that when in the absence of measurable? Well, you just have to listen at the end of the day, and that is by far the most important thing. But that kind of short circuits this. Oh, the rest of this video is a waste of time, because all you need to do is go away and listen. Well, that really is actually the answer.
Stop watching now, go away and listen.
Because my best advice is, don't believe any of the hype you read. The finest tone arm in the world. It isn't. The reviewers have said so countless times. So you got to forget the hype, and also certain preconceived ideas. Rigidity is a very important thing. Resistance to bending. We went through that in our first video. And so you'd think, well, naturally, the best thing to do is you want to have a really good, wide, a large diameter arm tube, because that'll be much stiffer, much more resistant to bending. The trouble with that is that there's a lot of ringing goes on. In other words, you've got what we call circular vibration. You've got the wall ripples all the way around, and the sound goes round and round and round. The larger that tube is, the more it rings, and the longer that circuit path gets. So what we found in the early days, we'd get the Riga arm tube and we'd put a couple of slots on the underside to just stop that ringing going on. Massive, massive improvement. but it doesn't do much for the torsion.
Yeah.
You're reducing your torsional strength massively, but it sounds better. And I'm just saying this to give a small example of the way that things aren't as simple as they seem. And the other thing we did with Riga tubes is we stripped all the powder coating off them because they sounded a lot better. Now, conventional wisdom would say, oh, no, you shouldn't do that.
Well, no, it's interesting because
the powder coating is damping the arm.
Yeah.
Nice, it's a soft material.
but the RB3000 doesn't have it.
No,
Maybe
I mean,
purposely so.
once Riga cottoned on to and saw the results, they copied it. And I can't say for sure that they copied it, but it was years after we did it first that they started polishing their tubes. So that's another example. Damping is a very, very difficult thing to get right. You can't just damp the arm and that's it, go away. Some damping sounds dreadful.
Why is that some overdamping sounds dreadful?
Oh, well, it slows the speed of transmission down,
Right.
and so you get timing issues, and it also may cause absorption issues at certain frequencies and suck out certain frequencies.
Okay.
I mean, it's a very important question. I mean, going back to your super stiff tubes, there's another one, which I failed to mention, titanium arm tube, rang like a bell. I shouldn't say that, but the high frequency ringing meant you never heard deep bass on the Alpherson arm. It was brilliantly transparent, very good, very beautiful top end, had nice wiring in it, but you could not get bass out of the thing. And I mean, if you'd gone for an audition, and it's very hard to audition arms, by the way, because it's a huge workup. You have to not only change the arm, you have to change the cartridge unless you have two identical cartridges. So most dealers are very reluctant to do arm tests. And if you come in for the dem and you say, I'd like to hear this arm, you may not pick up that it lacks deep bass. I'm not talking about the percussive bass, because sometimes in a review you'll hear the reviewer say, it's got fantastic bass, explosive, and so on. Well, that's when you strike a drum, you've got bass going all the way from 10 hertz up to 20 kilohertz. And the crash which is often what you hear, and everyone says great bass, is high percussive, is the percussive bass of the strike. It's not deep bass at all. You need another instrument to show up deep bass, and that's where you'll get fooled if you're listening to a drum. You'll hear all the the detail and the crashing, but you've got to be very careful to notice if the drums actually go deep. And that's the most difficult thing about arms, because a lot of these very highly rigid arms tend to have that ringing in the high frequency. In other words, like some of the most expensive arms in the world break up at 2.5K or higher. Well, all the harmonics are going to be where the breakups are, and they're not necessarily going to produce very deep bass. Sometimes they could, I'm not saying they won't, but there's a big problem there, because if the thing can't vibrate at all and there's absolutely zero vibration, then no energy is going to travel up that tube, apart from one impulse, which is going to hit the counterweight straight away.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it quite like that, in terms of you need some amount of transmission.
You do. This is it. This is it. It's the balance. I mean, that's why people who say, you must have carbon fibre because it's 5 times stronger, have lost the plot that things actually do have to vibrate. And total stiffness is not the answer.
Yeah, just for the record, we've used carbon fibre as well.
Absolutely. We had a very successful carbon fibre arm. And then we found a particular alloy which was better. Oh, by the way, another one is low friction. One magazine measures the friction on bearings. And as I said to you earlier, the lowest friction isn't necessarily the lowest friction bearing, because they're ignoring the cable friction, which in our arms is far higher than the bearing friction, because it has to be. So this is another example of where, if specifications aren't the whole truth.
To some degree, is that helpful though? Because in that case, you're getting a figure for the overall torque of the arm, whether it's a combination of the bearing and the cables, but is it more that it was it as the bearing when it's?
I would strongly disagree with that, because if you have a high friction bearing and a low friction cable, it's a disaster.
That is more of an issue. Yeah.
It's an absolute disaster.
Yeah. So it's unclear which one of those two it's actually measuring. Okay,
yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
No, that's a fantastic point. Okay.
I mean, a friend of mine, just to summarize this, said, he made a comment which we always repeat to one another, and that is, I've never been able to tell yet by looking at the specifications what an amplifier sounds like, what a speaker sounds like.
Is that Dave?
So never try. You can't go on this stuff. And he's a really top amplifier designer.
Yeah.
One of the best.
Yeah. Okay, so that was why measurements aren't necessarily what they're cracked up to be. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.